Are you in the trenches? You have multiple children, multiple grades, multiple ages, multiple needs, multiple levels. Are you feeling a bit overwhelmed? Are you longing to find ways in your day to bring all of your children around the table together as a family? Are you weary of juggling classes for the different grade levels? Are you tired of tackling the extra work that you need to do in order to get everyone doing the same lesson? Are you longing for family-oriented curriculum? You can't do every subject together. It's not realistic, but there are many that you can do with thought and creativity. In this session, I will give you some practical helps for teaching history, literature, geography, art, writing, Bible, science, vocabulary, and more across multi-age grade levels that you can do as a family together. So take those multivitamins, grab a cup of coffee, and come sit and listen for a while. I am a mom of 5 awesome children. 2 have flown the coop, and 3 are still at home. My husband and I live in a house in the country in Central Virginia. We love the Lord, love our family, have a passion for adoption, 3 of our children are adopted, and have a passion for teaching children history in a 4-year classical approach. I have a degree in nursing, education, and a master's in religion. I love books. I love books. I have loved books since I was a little girl and consider a day without a book to read to be very depressing. Each time I have to glean books out of our family library, I feel like a part of me is being carted off. I love books. When my oldest boys were entering school, I can tell you this without any pause, I was not going to homeschool. It went against everything I knew about schooling and socialization. I had an education degree and was definitely one of those educators who believed that socialization was important. So off to a Christian school they went. I hated it. It was a strict traditional school where my boys had to have their feet planted firmly on the floor and their hands nicely folded on their desks all day. My oldest son loved the kids there, so we stuck it out until he finished 3rd grade. But then he got a teacher who was stricter than the other already strict teachers, and he began to melt down each day before school. He was a kid who rarely got in trouble at school, but he was so stressed over this teacher that he could hardly function. He began to beg me not to send him to school. When I asked him if he wanted to be homeschooled, he started to cry and said, "Yes, yes, yes," over and over again. Then I began to do what I had vowed I would never do. I pulled him out of school and started homeschooling him. Soon after that, I pulled my other one. We loved homeschooling and never looked back. In those first weeks, I started out with the curriculum they had been doing at the Christian school. That lasted a few weeks, and then I slowly began to toss what I didn't like and exchange it. I tend to be a free spirit when it comes to formal traditional curriculum. I like to teach outside the box, so I just ditched the box. But I had to pick what we were going to do. My number 1 priority, do as much homeschooling that we could together. I did not want to have each child doing a totally different program in every single subject. That to me equaled exhaustion and felt lonely. My number 2 priority, I wanted my children to read books, good books, lots of books. I wanted to drown them in books. I wanted to give them freedom to read as many good quality books as I could get my hands on. So whatever I picked had to have that as a primary part of the material. That was when I stumbled upon a little-known curriculum called Biblioplan. It was based on the premise of doing history in order. I liked that. It incorporated having the children reading good quality literature on the same time period as what they were studying in history. I really, really liked that. Did I mention that it did history in order? That's an entirely different topic that I could talk about for days, about how passionate I am about having children study history in order. And it allowed for us to have both boys doing history together. To us, it was the jackpot. Biblioplan was exactly what I wanted. It changed our lives. All of a sudden, our boys were reading all kinds of interesting history-related books and loving history. And not only that, they were learning history. In just a couple of years doing history and literature hand in hand, I was shocked at how much history and geography my kids were learning, and the books they read. Oh my goodness, utter bliss for this book-loving mom. History was the absolute highlight of our day. All Biblioplan was back then was just a basic guide. It was just a plan that lined up history and literature. I loved it, even though I had to spend tons of time and energy filling in the holes. It was most definitely not a mom-friendly, open-and-go curriculum. I eventually started teaching history at our co-op and used Biblioplan's philosophy with my classes. Again, all I had to work with was that one simple guide. To make my classes flow easier, I changed Biblioplan's scope and sequence that first year teaching. I needed it to be more teacher-friendly. I was changing it for my personal use, not as part of Biblioplan. Since I couldn't legally copy maps and question pages from the spines I was using, I had to make my own, so I did. I had to make timelines for my students. I had to come up with easy-to-do activities. None of these were part of Biblioplan. I was completely on my own making all this stuff. Talk about spending thousands of hours. This was no open-and-go, easy-peasy curriculum. But whatever I did, I was able to do with my students at school and my kids at home. By this point, I was also homeschooling 2 other children, so I now had a number of different grades and levels sitting around my table and also at the co-op. To make a really long story short, at the same time I started teaching at the co-op, Biblioplan was bought by a fellow teacher at the co-op who happened to have her child in my class. She loved what I was doing to her curriculum. She loved the way I was changing the scope, loved the maps and the question pages, loved the research I was getting her child to do, loved the timeline figures I was doing. She loved the open and go aspect. After some discussion, she asked my husband and I to join into a partnership with her. We did. We partnered with her for about 7 years and then bought Biblioplan from her, so now it is our company. 14 years later, I still teach history at that co-op. Up until we adopted our little girl, I also taught Biblioplan at a small Christian school 3 afternoons a week. Multi-age, multi-grade. Homeschool families can do it, co-ops can do it, schools can do it, you can do it, because I have done it. Okay, so there are certain subjects that don't lend themselves to doing together unless your children are extremely close in age. Teaching your child to read. That is an individual thing. Math. Math is something that is individual for the individual child. Grammar. Grammar isn't something that you want to teach a 3rd grader and a 7th grader at the same time. And spelling. So teaching a child to read, math, grammar, and spelling are all 4 different subjects that unless you have children that are really close in age, you need to teach them according to their age and grade level. Math is obvious. Grammar is pretty obvious. Spelling, you can't have a 2nd grader doing 7th grade spelling words, and of course teaching children to read. So those are subjects that you can't do. But there are subjects that you can do together, and that is what the focus is of this talk. Science is a subject that you can do as a family until the oldest child in the family hits 7th or 8th grade and begins to go for high school credit. You don't need to have every single child in the family doing their own science subject. You don't need to have this child doing science in this cubby and this child doing science in this cubby. At the co-op where I teach, all the children grades K to 7 do the same science. Their curriculum is designed on a cycle of 3 years. So kids cycle through the science subjects at least 2 up to 3 times. In 7th or 8th grade, the students switch to the formal general science class. And then they go from there to physical science, biology, chemistry, and physics. So up until formal science years, which is 7th or 8th grade, kids can have a blast doing science together. Families can do science together. My older sons did science at the co-op. They did the fun experiments at co-op, and we did the reading and researching at home. We did it together, and it was a blast. So science is something that if you find a family-friendly, experiment-focused science program, you can do science together as a family up until your oldest hits 7th or 8th grade. Vocabulary is a subject you can do separately, but there are ways to do it so you can have students doing it together. Over a 2-week period, focus on 10 to 15 vocabulary words. You can choose a curriculum like Wordly Wise to pick your words or find your own. The younger students work on memorizing the meanings of the words and practice writing them. The older students can use the words as their spelling words, learn other synonyms and antonyms, learn the meanings of the words, incorporate the words into their writing, and on and on. The family is challenged to find ways to incorporate that new vocabulary into their everyday talking. There are so many ways you can make learning vocabulary words fun and entertaining, and it can be a very family affair activity. So science and vocabulary are two things you can do together. Bible can definitely be done as a family. All 12 years you can do Bible together. Memory work, all 12 years. There's in the classical mentality, the thought is that memory work is specific for the younger grammar stage kids. I'm not a big proponent of that because I think that children in grades K to 12 all are capable and should memorize. Your older ones, especially if they're memorizing scripture, if they're memorizing quotes, or if they're memorizing documents, famous documents, those are fantastic things for kids to memorize. And as they're memorizing, they're thinking and pondering about what they're learning. Little kids, of course, are great memorizers, and middle school kids are just as capable of memorizing too. And if you pick everybody doing the same thing, you can adapt it so the younger ones don't do as much and the older ones do more. But memory work is something that you can do as a family. History, absolutely. All 12 years you can do history together. Geography, all 12 years you can do geography together. Art history. You can study in the great artists is a blast, and it's definitely a family fun activity. Our books, our textbooks are filled with art from the masters. Each week the kids are exposed to paintings, drawings, and more. How much fun to look up the art and find out the story behind it, to study the artists. And it's something you can do as a family. And there are some great art history programs out there, and they're programs that you can do with the whole family. Hands-on arts and crafts and games and activities, absolutely full family fun. Cooking, field trips, family reading times. These are all things that you can do as a family. And if you happen to pick a history program that weaves in history and Bible and literature and family read-alouds and writing prompts and memory work and art and geography and cooking and field trips and watching movies together, then you have hit the jackpot. So, here we go. Picture this. It's Monday morning. Everyone is sitting around the table. Maybe you're eating together, maybe breakfast is finished. It's family time from your littlest to the oldest. You just finished doing your morning devotions. After Bible, most families split up. Everyone to do their different curriculum for their different age groups. You go sit in your cubby with your books and you sit in your cubby with your books, but not you, because the goal here is to get everybody together. So the first thing you need to do is you need to get a globe and get it out and put it on your table. And for history, I had a globe, and I also gave everyone a write-on, wipe-off map. They're painless learning maps from a company called Painless Learning. Reading Rainbow Resource sells them. There's lots of other companies that do too. You can buy them on Amazon. They are an awesome tool. I use them at the co-op. I use them with my students at the school. I use them with my own children. On the one side is the full color map. And on the opposite side is a black and white blank lined map where the kids can fill it in, so they can flip it over and look at the color, look at the states or whatever you're working on, or the countries, and then you can flip it back over and you can write it on. And they're a great way to get the kids interacting. So I have a Painless Learning map in front of me. Painless Learning Company makes maps of different countries. They make the states. And then they make a lot of maps like presidents and stuff like that. But we're talking geography, so we're looking at the continent maps or the state maps. So I use them with my own children. I want my children to see what we are studying. I want to point out on the map or the globe exactly what we're talking about. And I also had a big map. So I've got a big map that I can point things to. They're looking for it on their Painless Learning map. They're marking it with their pens. And then I've got the globe, because the globe gives the kids the map in 3D. They can see it. They can see the world in the proper form. Seeing is understanding, and for your need to see and touch and visualize children especially, having a map in front of them is the best way to help them understand the history and the geography you're doing with them. So you got everybody at the table, you've got the maps, you've got the globe. You're going to spend the next 20 to 45 minutes enjoying sweet time reading the history for the day. How much you read depends upon who is sitting around the table. If it is only littles, K to 2s, then you will read for 5 to 15 minutes. If they're under 10, if they're 10 and under, then you're going to read for a little bit more, 15 to 20 minutes. If you have middle schoolers, then the reading will increase 30 to 45 minutes. And if you have high schoolers, you're going to read for 45 minutes to an hour. Now, some of you are going, I have a whole bunch of kids that are a whole mix of ages. I get that because we're multi-age, multi-grade. So with these, then you're going to read to the majority. Read what most of them will enjoy and need. So if you have itty bitties and older ones and then a bunch of ones in the middle, you read to the ones in the middle. After you finish reading, you let the oldest finish their history reading independently. So they're going to go read the rest of the story. And the little ones are just going to listen as you're reading to the majority, and they're not going to get everything, but that's okay because they're going to listen and absorb what they can. As you are reading, you are stopping a lot. You are engaging them in the reading. You're asking them questions. You're explaining things they may not understand. You are enjoying it with them. You're reading in accents and you're reading in different voices. You're just making it interesting. And while you're reading, you're pointing to the globe and finding places on the map. And if they have painless learning maps in front of them, they can be marking on them while you're reading. So what are your kids doing while you're reading? Well, some will sit quietly and listen and not ever make a peep except to answer questions. Some are going to be wiggling in their seats and may even slide all the way down to the floor, be sitting under the table and climbing around and finding things to play with and just kind of looking like they're disengaged. Some are going to be trying to doodle on that painless learning map that's sitting in front of them. So what should your children be doing while you're reading? Well, some should quietly listen and answer questions because that's the way God made them. Some are going to wiggle in their seats, and that's okay, because chances are that even if they're wiggling in their seats and maybe sitting on the floor and maybe climbing under the table, chances are they're still listening. They just can't sit still. Some of them are doodlers, and they're going to be doodling right on that painless learning map. I'm a doodler. So when I sit in church or when I sit and listen to a lecture, I always have a pencil in my hand or a pen or a marker or something, and I'm drawing and I'm writing and I'm taking notes because that's how I listen. And kids that doodle, a lot of times they're doodling because that's the best way they have to listen. So if they're sitting quietly, if they're wiggling, if they're doodling, those are all fine things. If you're using Biblioplan, you can give them a coloring page because we have a coloring book that goes along with our history. So you can pull out of there the coloring picture for the day, and we usually have 1 to 2, usually 2 pages a week. And you would want to tell them this is who you're coloring today, so that they have a clue. And as they're coloring, you're going to encounter that person or that event or that building or that battle or whatever. You're going to encounter that in the reading, and it's going to bring that picture to life. So that it's not just a disembodied picture that they're drawing. It has meaning to them. So they can color, which for your doodlers is a really good thing. You can also, and this is what I used to do when I taught at the Christian school, I'd give all the kids a blank piece of paper. And I'd say to them, I want you to illustrate something that I'm reading. So I want you to listen, and when something strikes you as interesting, I want you to illustrate it on that blank piece of paper. My kids loved doing that. My kindergarten through second graders, they ate that up. They would, every time I'd hand that blank piece of paper, they would grab it, and then they'd sit there and listen, and you could see their little ears tuned in. And as soon as I start reading, they'd start drawing. And sometimes they would draw 5 or 10 little pictures on that paper. And when I was all done reading and talking, then they could tell me what they drew. And they couldn't always remember, but it was a great way to review what I had read. The older kids took them very seriously too. They really enjoyed doing it. And a lot of times the older ones just spent a lot of time drawing one thing, but they did it well. And again, it was an opportunity for them at the end to tell me what they drew. And you can even go farther with that and have them write a paragraph, which would incorporate writing into what they're doing. So that's something else they can do. They can listen, they can wiggle, they can doodle, they can color, they can draw. You can also give them their answer books, their question books. So we have cool history questions that are filled with questions that come from the reading. So as you're reading, they can be looking at their books and writing the answers down. So that's a really good option. You can also, especially with your little ones, give them Play-Doh or kinetic sand or other quiet, soft toys that come from a box that comes out only during history reading time. So when it's time to read history, that box comes out. You pass out those quiet toys, those quiet things for the younger ones or the wigglers to do, and they can sit there and quietly play and work, do things with their hands while you're reading, building a puzzle, doing things like that are really good. And that box is something that you just keep adding things to or taking things out of. So you're going to change the items in the box. Otherwise, they're going to get bored with it. So this week, we're going to put little Legos in there and they can build Legos. And the next week, you're going to do Play-Doh. And the next week, you can put puzzles and they can build puzzles, quiet puzzles while you're reading. But give them something to do for those wigglers or for those little ones. And as I said earlier, while you're reading, you are discussing. We have a discussion guide with tons of props for what to discuss as you are reading the chapter or after you finish reading it. Whether you use ours or not, discussion questions are great resources to engage all the family members. You can compare and contrast the philosophies or religions you encounter with your Christian faith. You can pick a Christian worldview question out of the discussion guide and use it for your family devotions or dinner time discussion. You can have them consider the event, the battle, the choice, the rule, etc., and have them wrestle with the rightness or wrongness of it. And you can use scripture to back up their positions. There's so many things you can do while you're discussing. After reading, after you've read, after you've discussed, don't let them go. It's not time to go to their cubbies yet. Because family time is the motto here. So what can you do? So if you're using Biblioplan, you have a lot of options. You can do maps, and a lot of other curriculums also have maps. So you can work on maps, and maps are a great way to reinforce what you're reading. Our maps are great because the directions are right on them. And so they become very mom friendly because you don't have to sit there and hover over the children while they're doing the maps. You can just hand them the maps and they can all help each other. And that's what our kids used to do. My kids used to they all work on the maps at the same time. They're coloring, they're talking, they're enjoying, they're fellowshipping, which is a great family thing. They can also work on their timelines. I love timelines. They're a great tool. What can you do with a timeline? Well, you can make it. You can give each child their own timeline in a book, and they cut the pieces out and they paste them where they belong. And our books have the pictures already in them, and everything's already done, so you don't have to do any. Again, it's very mom friendly. You have no mom prep for our timelines. And at the end of the year, they have a wonderful keepsake. Or if you just want to do one family timeline, then everyone can work on that one timeline together. You can have one kid cut the pieces out for that week and the other one paste them in. You can also give each child the blank timeline pages in a notebook or in the book. And instead of cutting and pasting the figures in, have them illustrate the figures. Have them draw their own version of the figures. And every day, every week, they're drawing the figures. And by the end of the year, they have a timeline that's actually a work of art. And which is a really cool way especially for your kids that like to doodle, that like to draw, that are artistic. It's a cool way for them to take the figures and draw their own versions of them. You can also, with us, you can get the timeline in ebook, and you can get it, print it yourself. And you can laminate it and you can hang it on the wall, and you can even laminate all the pieces, and you can put Velcro on them, and they can stick those pieces on the timeline and take them off and put them back on. So those are things you can do with the timeline. Timelines are a great option. What else can you do? If you're using our material, they have questions to answer. If you didn't already do them when you're reading, then they can do them later. And they can help each other answer the questions. And at the end of all of our questions, we actually have the kids doing fun research activities, a question that's not in the book, to get them researching. We have 3 different leveled research questions. So for your elementary, there's one type of question. For your middle school and for your high school, they have a research essay. You can also do writing activities. You can have them write a summary of something they read. You can have them do a compare or contrast, or you can, we have writing ideas in our family guide that they could do. You can also have them doing copy work. You can have them notebook. We have notebooking of giants of the faith for all the giants that they encountered that day. Or you can notebook the countries or the states, or if they're doing states and presidents for year 3 and 4. You can also have them memorize. They can memorize poems or speeches or things like that. So those are all the things that you're doing as a family. And it's 20 to 45 minutes of reading, and on average, another 30 minutes to do the rest, 4 times a week. And the rest, you can do a lot of that independent, or they can do it all together, helping each other. Okay, so all of that that we're doing is all built around family time. I didn't include the craft, the hands-on activity in that. That's separate. That's a separate time period, but honestly, for most students, it is the favorite part of the day. When my students come walking into my co-op, the first thing that they ask me every week is, Mrs. Nall, what are we going to do today? Not, Mrs. Nall, what are you going to lecture us about? But Mrs. Nall, what are we going to do? Because kids love to do. I don't care if it's my 8th graders or my 3rd graders. They love to do. And I know for mom, you hear hands-on and you immediately go, I've got all these kids. I've got so much on my plate. It is so hard to do the hands-on. So here's my rule of thumb. Pick 9 things to do in a year. 9 months of the year we usually teach 9 things, 1 a month. Sit down in the summer with a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or a Coke or whatever, and take either our craft activity book or do some research online and pick out 9 easy, cheap, and the most fun activities you can find. 1 a month. And you're also going to be doing science activities, so that's another hands-on thing. But if you can do 1 history activity a month, and I guarantee you that if you start looking, you can go, well, yeah, we can also add this in because it's just a game. Or that's just a cooking thing and we love to cook. So you could possibly do more, but make your focus to do 9. Our books have hundreds of ideas in them, so 9 is not going to be a hard thing to find. And most of our activities are simple and low budget because I'm a teacher and I need simple and low budget, and I wrote the books. So I only have about 20 minutes for hands-on activities in my co-op, and so I can't do things that are complicated. Sometimes I cheat and go on Oriental Trading and I find similar materials than what is in my book. And I go with those. And Oriental Trading is a perfect thing for multi-grade, multi-age parents, families, because they come in groups of 12. And unless you have more than 12 kids, you usually have enough to go around. I want history to be fun. I want the focus to be fun, and I want them to remember what we did. And so much of the time when we do hands-on stuff, that's when they remember what we did. So that's history, that's geography, that's writing, that's memory time, that's Bible, that's copy work, that's notebooking, that's art, that's science, that's vocabulary, that's family discussion time, that's all together. Then they're going to split off and do grammar by themselves, spelling, and of course the all-important math. So what about literature? I'm a big believer in reading literature that goes along with the history you are studying. Picking history and literature together increases your ability to keep everyone together. Think about it. Big brother is reading Homer, while the middle schooler is reading a literature book about the Odyssey, and the youngest are looking at picture books about the Odyssey. Everyone is reading age-appropriate literature that is lining up with the history you're doing. How cool is that? And even though they're reading age-appropriate literature, you're still doing it as a family. So how do you do the literature? Number 1, you start with the read-alouds. The read-alouds tend to be the absolute best books on the list. And they are another great opportunity to have the family together. Pick books that the majority of the children will enjoy if you have a wide spread. The littles can listen and play quietly. The older ones can take turns reading the read-alouds if they're good readers. And you can have everybody doing them together. Number 1 is read-alouds. Number 2, on a very practical level, you need to institute a quiet reading time every day in your home. It can be during nap time for the littlest, or it can be before bedtime. It can be right before lunch or right after, but you need a designated time. When my oldest boys were homeschooling, it was right after lunch. We set aside an hour of reading, nothing else. For my book-loving son, it was pure joy. For my boy who loved books, but who was easily distracted, and he struggled to engage with one when anything around him was happening, it was perfect for him. The house went on lockdown during that hour. It was a much-needed time for me to rest or read myself, and it was a perfect time for my two boys to read themselves. With my three younger ones, our quiet reading time is right before bedtime, which personally isn't as ideal, but it works for us. The hour before bedtime is the quiet reading hour. For my book-loving son, my adopted son who loves to read, it's the time for him to read without his brother constantly talking and driving him insane. For my I really don't like books son, it's a time for him to learn to focus and to engage with books. He struggles in that hour to focus, but because it's a set-aside reading time with nothing else going on within his vision, it really helps him, and it has helped him engage with the books, and it has helped him become a better reader. For our little girl, it's time for us to get her ready for bed. It's time for quiet puzzle building. It's time for sitting on our laps and book reading for her. So it's an hour for us to focus with her. She gets her bath. She gets to build puzzles. And then she loves books. So we can sit with her and we read books to her. And then she gets to sit with her books for about 10 minutes, and she can read them to herself, and then we put her to sleep. And we're doing all of this while the boys are reading. And it's just a perfect time because we're not distracting them and they're not paying too much attention to her. And when we're all done, when she's down for the night, then they're done for reading. And then we actually a lot of times let them listen to 30 minutes of an audio after that because they like listening to audiobooks, and it's a great way to end their day. So quiet reading time is my number 2 priority. Number 3, find a curriculum that gives you a great book list, resource list to work from for all the ages, okay? Don't try to go it alone. I'm assuming that you aren't just buying books out of a box from a curriculum. There are only 1 or 2 boxed curriculums that pre-pick all of your books for you, that you still have everyone doing the same history together. There's a few curriculums out there where everybody's doing the same history together and they pick your books for you. Most of the curriculums you buy out of a box that are history or literature are not that easily adaptable to do with multi-age, multi-grades. With Biblioplan, with our curriculum, which Biblioplan actually means book plan, we give you a book list, which is our family guide, and you pick and choose for each child. So why don't we just pick the books for your students? Well, every family is different. Every family has different priorities, desires, beliefs, and values. Some families like certain books, others do not. Some families want to have a whole host of options to do, others want the bare minimum. Some families want just the history, some want just the literature, and some want both. Some families are looking for credits for their high schoolers, and some have little kindergartners and they want a simple plan for them to use. Biblioplan is set up to allow for the diversity in the different families. If we boxed all the books for each of your grades for you and sold them as sets, you would spend a fortune, and we may not have selected the best books for your particular son or daughter. You end up spending money on books that won't be used. Your 6th grader may be reading on an 8th grade level. Your 8th grader may be a struggling reader. Your son may not like the girl book in his box. Your daughter may not want to read the gory war book in her box. Our curriculum is a smorgasbord. Some of you in this room love books, and you approach the literature sections with joy and wonder and a crazy desire to purchase and read every single book on the list for the pure joy of owning the books and immersing in them. Having a book list like this makes moms like us, because I was like this, very crazy, because picking and choosing can be extremely difficult. We want to do them all, and I tended to get them all. Some of you in this room love books but have a very limited budget, and or multiple kids and you just can't afford to buy any. Some of you have an excellent public library that caters to homeschools and is going to have a large portion of these books. Some of you in this room have the world's worst public library, which will have none of the books on this list. Some of you look at these literature lists with pure terror and are just plain overwhelmed at the thought of having to pick your child's literature books. You're ready to bolt and go buy a boxed curriculum that has all the reading books for the year inside the box. Okay, I get all these concerns. I hear them all the time. I experience them myself. Okay, so let me start by saying relax, mom, relax, dad. And let me say this too. So recently, with our curriculum, we have actually created in our family guide a top picks. We call them quick picks, and they are the favorite books that most people like. And so if you go to like a unit for your kindergarten through second graders and you look at that unit, there will be a little thumbs up next to the quick picks, and so that will tell you these are the favorite books. And you don't have to even do anything except just go, okay, I want that one, and that one. And you've got all your books picked for the whole year for the different grade levels if you use our quick picks. So it just takes the pressure off if you don't want to have to pick the books. But if you're picking the books, start with your oldest child. If you're going to buy any books, especially if you have a limited budget, buy for that one. That way you're building your library from top down. Pick books of interest rather than just books on a specific grade level. And you want to go simple at first, 1 or 2 books a unit, and then expand. So the rule of thumb is start simple and then go big. Start simple. What does that mean? The goal of doing a Charlotte Mason classical literature approach is to immerse your children in history-related books so that they can live the history through the stories they are reading. When they read about the Pilgrims in their spines, they learn the history facts. When they read about the Pilgrims in their literature, they get to experience the facts. The two go hand in hand together. The goal is not to drown your kids. Rather, the goal is to let them savor and enjoy the experience. So what does that mean? It means that you don't do everything, especially in the beginning. Start slow. Start simple. Biblioplan is broken down into units. Each time period has 6 units. Ancients, medieval, early modern, and modern are our 4 different time periods. To start simply, focus on the first unit for whatever year time period you are doing. Most units are about 6 to 7 weeks long. So you consider your children. Your love to read books could devour 6 or more books in a unit. I could. If your budget allows or your library accommodates, let them devour that many. If your best reader is your oldest child, then you have hit the jackpot because all the books you buy for them can be passed down to the younger students. You always want to buy books for the oldest first. Your hate-to-read and struggling reader kids will barely be able to read 2 books in a unit. That's okay. Pick 1 or 2 of the best books. Let them help you pick. For these kids, 1 to 2 books in 1 unit is a victory. Count your blessings. That's about 6 to 12 books in the year. Even 1 book means they read 5 to 6 books in a year. For your middle kids, for your kids that like to read but don't devour books, you're talking 3, 4 books in a unit. So for those hate-to-read and struggling readers, you can also pick 1 book on their grade level and pick 1 to 2 easy-to-read books below them. So if they're in the 5th to 8th grade range, look at the younger book list and find some easy, fun reading picture-style books and put them out on the counter. Don't say a word. Just put them beside the cereal box. If those books relate to the history you are studying, chances are those hate-to-read kids are going to open those picture-style books and look at them. They may not read every book, of every word out of every book, but they will look at the pictures. And remember, the goal is to experience the history through books. And I guarantee you that your older kids, that even if they're not hate-to-read, but they're like to read, but they're going to look at those books too. Please, 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 parents, do not think that you are failing or your kids are failing if you choose books on a grade level or 2 or even 3 levels below their grade level. Honestly, some of the books on the K-3 book list have some of the coolest history facts in them. My oldest son loved looking at and reading his younger brother's books. The pictures are more engaging. The information is easier to devour. And if our goal is to experience history, then who cares if they're reading a simple picture book about knights and castles and kings rather than a 200-page serious books about the same subject? If your reluctant or struggling reader will sit and devour picture books, then by all means let them devour them. It's a total win. Also, please, please, please do not think that your gifted readers should only read the more complex, challenging books because their reading level dictates. You are going to put them on the train to burnout. Those reading lists ebb and flow. Many of the 3 to 5 books are also great to 5 to 8 grade kids. We do that for a reason. We are not trying to drown kids, but let kids experience. Our gifted kids like breaks. They like silly too. They like simple at times. They don't always want to read the 500-page series. Yes, we should encourage them to read them. But if you can give them a break sometimes and let them read an easier book, go for it. And if you have a first grader who is reading on a 5th grade reading level, please be careful about drowning them in 5th grade books or beyond. Parents of blossoming readers often make the prideful mistake that because their child is reading on that level, then they should read on that level. As a mom who had very advanced readers, I learned the hard way. I drowned my oldest child in my prideful belief that since he could read those grade level books, he should. He read them, but he drowned in them. He ended up disliking reading for a season, and I was responsible. The joy of reading lost its joy because I pressured him to move faster. My motives were pride. Look at what my son is reading. Instead of pushing them up, expand their reading. Give them a ton of reading options within their grade level. If you need to jump them up a few reading levels, be wise. Restrain from going more than 2 grades. There are zillions of age-appropriate 3rd grade books to immerse your 1st grade reader in. There are zillions of 5th grade options for your 3rd grade reader. And along with books, find audiobooks. My biggest boys loved to read, but they still loved audios. Every time we were in the car, they were listening to their audiobooks. My little boys listen to their audiobooks before they fall asleep at night. It's a great way for them to calm down. It's a great way to get good literature books in them. So we start simple. For literature, we focus on the 1st unit. We pick simply. We then watch. We wait. We evaluate before we move on to the 2nd unit. If what we did worked perfectly and no tweaking is required, then simple is your big. And it is good. If what you did wasn't enough, then expand. Get more. Go bigger. And if what you did was too much, then we rethink. We have to take into account the child. My I hate to read boy also hates working. He hates it. If I did the easiest easy of everything, he would still consider that too much. I can't let his resistance to work dominate my choices. He desperately needs me to push him. If I started out simply and his resistance is because work is the issue, then I have to stay the course. Tough love, tough love. But if a child is struggling in the simple choices I made, truly struggling, then simple needs to be simpler. We cut back on spine reading. We cut back on the literature reading. We choose easier books. We go the audiobook route. We pray. We read out loud to him or her. We do more hands-on activities. We think outside the box for the struggling child. We make games out of the material. We slow down to covering the material in 2 weeks instead of 1. We do whatever we do to meet the needs of that child. There is no right or wrong. Adjust, expand, decrease. If you go on our website, we have a section called Tips and Tricks. It's for the struggling learner, the gifted learner, and everyone else. It's jam-packed with ideas on how to expand and modify, adapt, and increase. There are so many ideas on there for multi-age, multi-grade families. Go check it out, www.biblioplan.net. Multi-age, multi-grade. Get your multivitamins. Mom, Dad, you can do this.